Well, hello everyone. My name is Mayor Cam Guthrie. I'm the mayor for the city of Guelph in Ontario, Canada, and I'm very pleased to offer a few words of importance of remembering veterans, and in particular, veterans of the First and Second World Wars. Guelph is actually a really growing city, a population of currently about 135,000 people. We're located 1 hour away from Toronto, and Guelph was actually founded in 1827. The First and Second World War had a profound impact on our city. When the First World War broke out, Guelph's population was only 16,000 people. And by the Second World War, it had actually grown to 23,000 people. Yet thousands of men volunteered to serve. Most of the men who volunteered were actually boys, many of them as young as 18 years old. Today, we can only imagine how they must have felt when they went off to war to distant lands overseas. And for many of them, it would have definitely been their first time even away from home. Our city's roll of honor monument, which is in our downtown, it lists more than 400 names of people who never returned home again. Their lives were cut tragically short by war, and the families were left to mourn and to remember them. Thousands more were fortunate enough to return to Guelph, but they were forever changed by the experience of war. The things they saw and experienced would affect them for the rest of their lives. Now, the famous First World War poem in Flanders Fields, which inspired the tradition of wearing a poppy on Remembrance Day to honor those who have lost their lives in war, was actually written by a Guelph native, John McCrae. McCrae was actually an army physician who served on the battlefields of France and tragically died of pneumonia shortly after the war had ended. McCrae's Guelph birthplace is now a museum, and there's actually a statue of him prominent in our downtown, and there's actually a local school that is named after him as well. Now, during the Second World War, Fred Lovett was one of many Guelph citizens who bravely answered that call to serve. And every year on Remembrance Day, November the 11th, thousands of people gather for a ceremony to honor those veterans. The ceremony is organized by the Royal Canadian Legion, and it includes the laying of wreaths at the cenotaph and a parade through our downtown. Thousands of school children learn about the importance of remembrance and the sacrifices of veterans through ceremonies and lessons at their schools. Now, Guelph City Council decided that 75% of all new streets in our city would be named in honor of those who had served our community and our country, with priority given to veterans of the First and the Second World Wars. And this is how Fred Lovett's name came to be on a street sign. And he will forever be remembered, of course, through that street now named Lovett Lane. This is a small way that Guelph can ensure the service and sacrifices of veterans that will never be forgotten. So on behalf of Guelph City Council, I want to thank Fred Lovett for his service to Canada, his generosity in sharing his story, and the years, of course, as it passed, more importantly for younger generations to learn about the sacrifices of veterans. It's very important to keep those stories alive. We are forever grateful for the extraordinary service and sacrifices of veterans. We thank them, we honor them, and we pledge to never forget them.
Well, before the war was something because everybody was going off to war, and I wasn't old enough. I was only 16, and that was the big thing. Nobody had a job, so it was an out, and everybody was old enough, decided it was good pay. You had for clothes, and you got your meals, and you got your place to stay. And I don't think any of us thought that war was actually they were going to see a war. They were just in there for camaraderie, but it turned out a little different. So of course, everybody, as soon as I was 18, I decided I want to be with them. And so I put my name down as 19, so to make sure I got in. And never ever thinking at that time that I'd end up where they were shooting each other. I remember my first impression that they were fighting a real war in Italy was I found a fella's ankle and boot on the ground in front of us on the road. And I just knew then that this was for keeps. Well, I had a good childhood as far as that goes. I don't know what I can tell you about it. I know that we had skating rinks in the park right across the road when I lived in one place. And we did a lot of outdoor things. My father built us a big snow ramp to follow to ski down. And I don't know. The daily routine was go to school and walk home. I don't know. I had a brother and 3 sisters, and we all. I don't remember much as it become 18. I always wanted to be a sign painter, which I ended up that way. And even in school, like I left collegiate very early because the principal called me down one day and he said it wasn't doing very good. And this was the first year in high school. And I made an appointment with him and I said, well, how be you let me go now and I'll come back next year and repeat the year. And he said, well, I think you should because you're not doing that well. And I was in a commercial class and I guess I should have been in an industrial class. But I always knew I wanted to be a sign painter and I was disappointed in the fact that nobody in school was teaching me anything to do with it. So anyway, I ended up not going back to school and thinking my father would take me into his business. And at the same time, all I got was, I have no time for truant officers. So when you're 16, this was when I was 14. But when you're 16, you come back and we'll see what we can do. So I had to find other jobs for a couple of years. And I worked in a woodworking shop building ice cream cabinets. And I ended up mostly working in a grocery store. And that same owner of the grocery store was the one that drove my mother and father, because they didn't have a car, drove them down to meet me when we come home from overseas after the war was over. So I guess he thought I was going back to work there. In the meantime, I took my credits from school, from the Army, which was $600 and some, I think it was. And I took $300 of it to go to trade school. And unfortunately, rather, I went back to Windsor in this trade school, which ended up being the same barracks which I had enlisted in. So it was one full circle all the way around. And I spent all of 46 pretty well there. I come home in January 46 and I spent the time, summer, in the school, and we got married that fall. Sunday afternoon, one afternoon, I sat there with a bunch of guys talking in a cab office, and the sergeant, this fella came down from Owen Sound, and he said, "I'm going to Windsor for a band. Does anybody want to come?" And the whole three of us decided, yes, we want to go. And so I went back home and I stole my brother's suit, went with him, and we went away to Windsor, and that's 200 miles, is it? Yeah, something like that. Come back Tuesday in uniform. Because at the time when I went back home, there was nobody there. My family had gone on a picnic, so I just, oh well, Harry's not using it. I took his suit and away we went. That's how fast we joined. There was no, yes, no, just go. But I joined a band, and I was lucky enough to stay in the band 2 years, and then they disbanded that armories and disbanded the band, and they all went to different bands. And when we got to England, it turned out I had to take a test by the Neller Hall fella, and I just wasn't good enough. And so I went, they put me in the infantry. And then when we went overseas on the Queen Elizabeth, it turned out that most of the band members were on the same, so when I finished, I went with them. Not for long, but I thought I'd go back. No, so I had to go back over here to this barracks, and that was where it all started. And when I joined up, I joined the band, and I played in the band for 2 years before I went overseas in '43. So I didn't end up in any basic training like the rest of them had, I guess. It was without basic training, actually. The only training I got was on the way down to Halifax. We stopped at a place called Windsor, Nova Scotia, where they had just built a new obstacle course. And we were there for about a week, and did some firing and some running and all the rest of it. But that's about the only training I had before we got into the action. The first impression of Italy, we landed on the boat, or off the boat, and into the streets, and eating our bloody stuff in the cans, and throwing the cans away and watching people and the kids grab them and take their fingers and try to get something to eat. And that was one of the first impressions, and how bad things were really for everybody that lived there. Yeah, we met very few. That's what concerns me a lot. We didn't see very many civilians, very, very few. So I know went one place where the lady gave us some eggs and stuff for eating, but that amazes you when you're about 20 years old and you see somebody, it was it cattle or what? It was all, they live right in the house with them or something. That floored me a little bit, but yeah, we did that. As for Uva, on the Gothic Line, all I can remember, and I don't know whether it was Gothic or Koreana, but I can remember the noise. They told us that 200 guns, I think, were shooting over our heads and allowing us to go forward. But I think that's what I missed mostly when I was over with you guys. I couldn't hear the noise of tanks and guns, and there's just so much going on at the time that you couldn't even hear yourself talk. I know being there, but I don't remember specifically what the battle was. It was the same as every other battle. was no difference. I know I hated to see tanks anywhere near me. They'd run over here, slit trench, and not even give a darn. I've had them fire over my head, lift you off the ground about that high, concussions. They'd fire, and then they'd take off. And then, of course, we'd get the receiving stuff, because they know where we were. I got left behind sometimes, at one time, to bury a man. Not bury him, give him a slit trench, or slow. He got a very shallow one, I'll tell you. And I had to dig that and get him set, and then back into the regiment. And all this time, it was just scary. That's for sure. So what we tried to do is try to stay together, and we felt comfort in the fact that somebody else was there with us. But I wouldn't want to do it again. I don't know, as far as friends, I had so many, I can't even remember, even though I can see their faces and everything, I don't remember the names. There was Cecil, of course, and he was from Guelph. Oh, I can remember the night before he was killed, actually, by 88. He put the Piat bombs in his own slit trench, and instead of putting the bombs separate, they put them in with them, and there was 2 men and 4 bombs, and I guess the 88 just hit them. And I was about as far as from here to that hedge, away from him. And when I run over, all I saw was this much of his wrist above the ground. He was gone. Yeah, but the night before, we had come across about 20 pigeons in a farmer's place, and of course nobody was there. The civilians had left. So the one fellow, I guess he was more experienced than anybody else, he said, well, I'll fix the pigeons, and he said, you go and get tomatoes, and you go and get the veggies or whatever the hell you can find, and we'll have dinner. And he made a big spread for us, and I went to get tomatoes, and on the way back, there was some shelling, and the tomatoes were, well, they thought I'd been shot to death. It's all blood down here, all tomatoes in the pocket. But anyway, Cease was there, and he had found, I don't know, a top suit and a top hat. And the guy wouldn't feed him because they didn't know who he was. Yeah, poor guy. You know, good job he ate that day. He didn't live another one. And that's how close it was always. You were always in that close to being shot or being something happened to you. Just there's no marks on my back, but that's where it would have been. Yeah. The one fellow one day that's beside me in a slit trench, and he started hollering, "Oh, I'm hit, I'm hit." And I leaned over and I said, "Roll over, you stupid bugger, you just got some shrapnel on your ass." He had a piece of shrapnel sitting on his, and he thought he was going home, I guess. Just shrapnel. And it hit the grapevines, and it's all over the place. You couldn't tell where the hell, where the shooting was. You can laugh about it now, but it wasn't very funny at the time. I just couldn't believe. He said, "How many, Tim? 1,400 people are," and they never got a chance to live. They just joined it and come over here and bang, the first battle, and they're gone. And it just seemed so unreal that they had no chance to live at all. They never got to have, I don't imagine many of them had a wife or whatever. No experiences in life. It's pretty sad. We went over here from going overseas, we went in the Queen Elizabeth, and after 5 years, we would come back in the Queen Elizabeth. And so that same year that I came home, I was married. And I didn't even write to, which ended up to be my wife while I was overseas. We had contact before the war in Sunday schools and in church, but I hadn't seen her until that come home one day, and Saturday night she had just finished working at Loblaws and was walking up the street, and I said, "Oh, well, where are you going?" And she said, "Well, I go up to Ryan's to the dance." And I said, "Oh, well, save me a dance." I said, "I'll be up later." So that was the beginning of the end. She even told her girlfriends that day that I just met the man I'm going to marry. So I might as well give up. What the hell? Anyway, we lasted 70 years before she passed away. So we did pretty good.